when I was reading about your past experiences and all, you were brilliant in academics, right? And then you had an engineering background. And considering I'm also an engineer, so considering engineering background, why you are so good in marketing? Engineers are so bad in marketing and sales, right? And you're so good at that.
I love the internships because it allowed me to work in teams, allowed me to meet a lot of interesting people. And being an extrovert, that's what I thrive on. And it allowed me to try different things. And I'm very hands-on. I learned by building things. It allowed me to build experience.
If I'm going to dig deep into the product, I can tell you many use cases which are going to be replaced, right? And there is a race going on right now for between the companies that who does it first. Whoever is going to do it first, that is, they are going to rule. They are going to rule that field. They are going to rule that niche. Hello everyone, my name is Ali. I'm the CEO of Al-Burraq Today we have another tech star with us. Masha, how are you doing?
Good, Ali. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining. I'm good. And thank you so much for sharing a lot of insights, which I'm going to ask you a lot.
Great. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Okay, Masha, it would be great if you can give your introduction so that our audience can connect with you.
So my name is Dr. Masha Petrova. I am a co-founder and CEO of a company called Nullspace, which is engineering simulation software for electrical and RF engineers. My background is I have a PhD in aerospace engineering from UC San Diego. And then I pivoted into the dark side of business and went into business development and marketing and led marketing teams in various engineering software companies.
Right. One thing which I was, when I was reading about your past experiences and all, you were brilliant in academics, right? And then you had an engineering background. And considering I'm also an engineer, so considering engineering background, why you are so good in marketing? Engineers are so bad in marketing and sales, right? And you're so good at that. So how was that transformation?
I think maybe because I wasn't great at engineering. No, I'm kidding. Well, thank you for asking that question.
That is why I clarified that you were great in academics. So that is why I clarified first. So how is that possible?
Great question. Can I just point out that how on brand I am? I've got same color shirt to match your aesthetic of your podcast here. This is the background of marketing.
Sure.
I think I'm not your stereotypical engineer. I'm actually probably have undiagnosed dyslexia. I'm terrible with numbers. I'm actually really bad at math. Growing up, I was always really good at art and dance and creativity. I was never great at math at all. But, I didn't like failing. And so I worked really hard to make sure that I was at least average. And the reason why I went into engineering is I was going to be an astronaut. My grandfather was an aerospace engineer back in the Soviet Union. He worked on developing the satellite program, the first satellite in space back during the space race. So I grew up around that, and I love the idea of exploring space. And so I was going to be an engineer, or I was going to be an astronaut, and I figured the quickest way to that is to become an engineer. My mom actually cried when I said I was going into aerospace or mechanical engineering, and she said, why would you give your life away or waste your life on engineering where you could be such a beautiful artist or furniture designer, anything but engineering.
Anything other than engineering.
That's right. But I was set on doing the hard thing, and I always liked solving hard problems. And what I've discovered, even though I had to work a lot harder than most of my fellow students in the class to do well in engineering, I overcompensated with my strength, which is I'm extreme extrovert. So I love working with teams. I like working with people. And I am very goal and results oriented. So even though math was not natural for me, I was very set on finishing. And so I've discovered internships in college as an undergraduate student. And so I did an internship every summer and winter, probably more internships than any other student I've met. I've interned in an aerospace lab, acoustics lab, a materials lab in Georgia Tech. I mean, I can't even. So every summer and winter I would intern, and I loved the internships because it allowed me to work in teams, allowed me to meet a lot of interesting people. And being an extrovert, that's what I thrive on.
Right,
And it
right.
allowed me to try different things, and I'm very hands-on. I learned by building things. It allowed me to build experiments and try different things and realize that I don't have to love the classroom. I don't have to be the stereotypical engineering student. And so when I went to graduate school, I was just really lucky. I had a very supportive advisor.
Mm,
And I also discovered being part of a team, organizing. I've invited different companies to come and present to the professors and the students, and collaborating with international research
right.
teams, right? So I kind of pulled on those strengths that I have, even though I'm very weak in standard, engineering criteria. Those strengths help me
So
excel
you
at
were trying
engineering.
to cover your math weaknesses by doing internships and moving ahead from your fellow.
Uh, I don't know if it's moving ahead, but kind of learning from people,
Mm.
because that's
Yeah,
helped
of
me. And
course. That is true because the hands-on experience is amazing, and nobody can beat the experience, right?
right,
I,
exactly.
I, yeah,
But eventually,
I was
nature,
going to.
yeah,
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go
I
ahead.
was going to say, eventually nature took its course. You asked me original question, how did I end up in marketing? My nature is to be very artistic, and to create things and to be very creative. And
Mm,
so marketing just kind of like naturally sucked me in. And again, being extroverted, working with customers and
mm,
sales team, you know, after I was a real engineer for exactly a year after I graduated, and then the salespeople were like, "Oh, this one, look at this one, could talk. Come explain to us how the
mm.
software works." So that's the.
Yeah, it happens a lot.
And I'm sorry, I cut you off. You were saying.
Yeah, I was saying that I remember my story because in every culture there are different norms, and we usually start working after our graduation, right? So what happens was I started working after 3 years of my graduation. So my degree was not completed. So I started working. So one of my professor asked me that what did you learn so far after few months. He said, what did you learn so far in front of all the class? So I said that I learned that learning starts from the gate of the university. So if you are inside the university, you are not learning. When you go step outside, you start learning from there. So that is what that was my story, and I started learning from there.
Yeah, exactly. I was very lucky that I found this thing called internships, which I knew nothing about,
Mm,
um,
yeah,
early on, and that allowed me to luckily learn at the university. But I understand where you're coming from.
yeah. Normally, I suggest people that when you are studying or when you have graduated, right? So do whatever work you are getting. If they're paying you less, say yes. Say yes to any work you are getting. If you are going to get some good opportunity, switch it. So, but do not say no to any opportunity that is coming in your way. So that is what I suggest to the people I confront or who talk to me. So that is what I suggest because experience is very important. Without experience, you are nothing. You are going to waste time if you're waiting for the best opportunity. So you
That's
have
great
to
advice.
start from somewhere.
Great advice.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I'm an intelligent person. That is why. Okay,
Agree.
let's move forward to my other question that is related to null space, right? Yeah, I have pronounced it right.
Yes.
Let's talk about null space, right? Let us know what you are doing in null space, and you have multiple products in that. So please explain us about that as well.
Yeah. So Nullspace, you pronounced it correctly, is actually a linear algebra term that has to do with
Yeah.
the matrix. matrix algebra for those of you who are nerdy enough to know what that is. So Nullspace develops software, like I mentioned, for electrical and RF engineers, and that's simulation software. So essentially, it allows engineers to run experiments in the computer when they're designing things like, say, antennas or radars or other radio frequency type devices. And for those who are listening who are maybe not sure what radio frequency is, if you think about any kind of technical thing like your phone, your smartwatch, your car, your Tesla, your plane that you're flying in, whenever there's any kind of communication that's happening between hardware devices and there's no wire in between them, that's RF communication. Somehow those things are talking to each other through the air, through waves in the air, and that's radio frequency or RF. And so in order to design those technologies, we need expert electrical engineers who then have to run experiments to make sure those technologies work. And in order to run those experiments, you can either set it up on a test workbench, real physical experiment, which could be very costly, very expensive,
very
and
costly.
very time
Yes,
consuming.
yes.
So now more and more people are utilizing things like engineering simulation software, which allows you to run those experiments inside of your computer to see whether your
Right.
antenna, your radar, your other RF component would function properly. And so Nullspace develops that type of software for engineers.
Right. And other than time, other than cost, you have to spend a lot of time as well. If there is any kind of small mistake, you'll have to go through all the iteration again, set up again, and then test again, right?
Currently, so yes, so we are not reinventing the wheel. Engineering simulation software has been around for about 40, 50 years. And the tools that are
Right.
currently available on the market today that engineers are used to using have been developed over 30, 40 years ago and remained virtually unchanged. Even though computers, as we know, have advanced quite a bit in the last 40 years, those engineering software simulation tools have not really adapted and changed to the new architecture, computer architecture, right? And so they are slow. So it's very typical for an engineer to set up a problem. Let's say they want to test how a particular antenna will function in the environment. So they set up the problem, that takes some time, and then they hit the run button for the simulation to actually run and simulate electromagnetics of that antenna. And it could easily take days, weeks, months. We've heard of engineers, one simulation taking months to get your results. And then you get your results, and there's no guarantee that they're the results that you want. So you have to go back, redesign your antenna or RF device and run it again for another days, weeks, months. And as you can imagine, that's a very slow process. So our software is designed for modern computing architecture, so it runs much faster for those types of simulations.
Right. So what is your vision about EM simulator?
EM simulation. So our vision is to become the go-to simulation technology for electromagnetics. Anytime an RF engineer needs to conduct an experiment to figure out if the new design the antenna or other RF device will work for him or her, they come to Nullspace to set up the experiments using Nullspace and simulate using Nullspace.
Right.
That's the big picture vision.
Right. And how are you going to use AI in that? Do let us know about that as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I know your podcast, you talk a lot about AI, and it's a very interesting concept. As we think about AI,
because I think let me cut you a little bit, because I think that AI is going to take my job. That is why I'm so much worried, and I'm talking about that a lot. Okay, let's back to the question that how AI is going to be used in your simulators.
Yeah, and so that's a concern of mine as well. Technically, AI should be able to take all of our jobs, really. If it's that much faster and smarter and self-aware, then what does it need us, right? So that's certainly a concern.
Yeah.
But what's interesting in the near term, so we are planning to add AI to our software tool because all of engineering design field, as an industry, as a field, is moving towards more automation, more AI guided design, to where right now an engineer will have an idea for, let's say, a part in a car or a spaceship or, a piece of a satellite, and they want to design that piece. So right now, in order for
Right.
them, they design it out, and then they have to test it to make sure it performs properly. So they use a combination of
Hmm.
physical testing and these slow, cumbersome tools that have been developed over 40 years ago. And that's kind of it. And they use their expertise and their knowledge and their experience with these tools to kind of tune the design. You can imagine that's a slow process when compared to what ChatGPT could do nowadays, you know? So the whole world as a whole, if we think about sort of design, engineering design, we're
Right.
moving from designing a few things and manufacturing millions of those few things to a much more customized
Hmm.
approach. We're moving towards designing hundreds of thousands of things and manufacturing a few of each, which would require a very
Right.
different approach, right? So you can't do the cookie cutter design process anymore. In order to do that kind of customized design, you need AI. And that's where we see, AI guided design and AI guided analysis come in. And um,
Hmm.
that's what Nullspace is planning on its roadmap. But it brings us to
Right.
something very interesting. You mentioned, oh, is AI going to take our jobs? And the way I described it, well, it sounds like we need less expert engineers, less engineering PhDs, less engineers if AI is going to do it all.
Right.
In the future, who knows? But for the
And
next,
and that is one perspective. That is one use case only. Now, if I'm going to dig deep into the product, I can tell you many use cases which are going to be replaced, right? And there is a race going on right now for between the companies that who does it first. Whoever is going to do it first, that is they are going to rule. They're going to rule that field. They are going to rule that niche. So there's a race going on between the companies, and I think that what you have just told, that is just one use case. That there are going to be many, many, many use cases in which AI is going to be very effective. And I name this as in future we are going to have a normal workforce and AI enabled workforce. And AI enabled workforce will have the jobs, and the other workforce is going to be waiting, or somehow be irrelevant.
yes, I mean, and that's certainly a valid perspective. I am not an AI analyst or
Hmm.
futurist, so I'm sure there's lots of things that we can explore, but I can give you my very
Yeah.
specific perspective, which I think is unique, and I have not heard much about that. And that has to do actually
Right.
with gender roles in
Hmm.
engineering. So right now
Right.
in my space, especially in electrical engineering, I was looking at statistics, something like 90% of electrical engineers are
Hmm.
male. And especially
Yeah.
I'm in a deep tech startup space. Pretty much everyone I talk to on a day-to-day basis, from investors to other co-founders to my mentors, is a man. And no issue with it. It's a great ride. However, if we think about design, engineering design, moving from this
Hmm.
very cookie cutter, like we design a few things and manufacture millions of them, to now we design millions of things and manufacture a few of each, right? It's much more customized, it's much more individualistic. Think about the kind of skill set that now the engineering workforce has to have if you are
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
considering an individual during your design. So historically, if you think about it, stereotypical engineers, you probably know, right? Introverted, male, possibly on the spectrum, right? No, not interested in social skills, and that's how it's been up to this point. Is that engineering is very logical, very straightforward, devoid of any emotion. I mean, emotion is still looked down upon
Yeah.
in R&D, right? It's like not a thing. Just emotion is just a weird thing that you just pretend like it doesn't exist,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you certainly
Hmm.
don't want to
Hmm.
deal with it when you're right. However,
Yes.
but if you think about it, if we're going to this more individualistic design approach in engineering, you're going to have to consider the human, because that's what individualistic
Yes.
means. You're catering to a particular individual, which means you have to consider things like feelings, emotions, the
Hmm.
hormonal spectrum, and historically, and there's been many studies that show that women, whether they're conditioned to do that or whether it's our brains that are set that way, women are more designed to social connection, right? We're more predisposed to social connection, so we're more predisposed to read social cues, to be empathetic in terms of like trying to look at the other person and understand their needs. And certainly emotions play a big role in a lot of female dominated industries. So I
Yeah.
think with this
I
aspect,
agree. The empathy factor in females is much more than males.
yeah, and again, I don't want to generalize, but if you look at just some basic statistics, you could see that women are more
Yes.
wired for social connection. So with AI bringing this more individualistic approach to engineering design, I think in the industries are forced to bring in more female engineers and female tech leaders if they want to be successful. Because, right, which is kind of a funny dichotomy if you think about it. I don't know
Yeah,
what your
I
thoughts
have
are on
so
that.
many questions. I have so many questions popping up right now.
Go for it.
Because the bias in AI is a real threat, right? And as you are saying that there are many male engineers than female engineers, right? And in future, AI is going to be used more. That means the male perspective will dominate the female perspective. That's a very important discussion, right? That if that is going to dominate the female perspective, then we are somehow going to kill that empathy factor, which is very important in the designs.
I agree, but even if you come to it from purely business perspective, saying, well, I don't really
Mm.
care, I just want to make money. Well, even if you just come at it that way, well, let's just say, right, I just want to make money. But
Yeah.
again, if we think about this approach of where all of engineering design is moving towards, from going from manufacturing or designing a few things and
Mm.
manufacturing a ton of them, to designing millions of things and manufacturing a few, that's a customizable approach that has to take into perspective the individual. Meaning you have to start caring about the humanity of your designs a lot more. And
Mm.
who is better to do that than the women who are kind of like wired to read that? Unfortunately, we are certainly have very disbalanced,
Mm.
workforce.
Yeah.
Girls are still very. I don't know what your experience is in being from a different
Mix.
culture. Well, so
Yeah.
for me, in
Yeah.
Russian, growing up in the Soviet Union, there's a lot of issues with that country, but
Mm.
the one thing that was good about it is that girls were not seen as different when it came to math and engineering. So
Okay. Okay.
you could like fashion, and you could like makeup,
Mm.
and you could like hanging out with your girlfriends and still have a PhD in math, and no one would think it's weird. In America, it's still
Okay.
very weird to like math and like technology and like engineering and also be kind of like a girly girl. It's two things that
Yeah.
in US I see as very separate. So until we start bringing those together and letting girls know that
Mm.
you could follow your TikTok, influencers that
Yeah. And
makeup reviews, but still like math, it's going to be a
by the way, one important thing I would like to mention here is I think that AI is going to help this thing as well in future, because of course, uh, when AI is going to take over the knowledge base and AI is going to dominate all the knowledge base, then gender bias can be reduced if it is done properly.
yes,
Don't you think so?
yes. If
Because
it's done
the
properly,
way
yes,
you're saying that, yeah, if it is done properly, that is the most important thing in inverted commas.
yes, exactly. But I think, for future business leaders, again, purely from the perspective is I want to know how to make money and how to dominate in this space,
Mm, mm,
you're going to need
yeah.
a bigger female workforce in the engineering design
Mm,
space.
mm,
So like figure that
yeah.
out. Start figuring that out now. Aside from the fact that, yeah, we don't want to lose things like empathy and human connection as AI starts to develop more and more.
Right, right, right. So from here, I have another question that is pretty much related to your CEO ship, right?
Okay. Okay.
So because you have raised the funds as well. So being a female leader, when you were going to raise funds, and you have an engineering background as well, right? So it was a double shot. I would say. So how investors and other people were receiving you?
So I'm actually in the midst of a fundraise. So our first seed funding
Hmm.
came from our parent company. So Nullspace was born
Yeah.
out of defense contractor, very successful,
Hmm.
growing defense contractor specializing in RF technology for the military. And so Nullspace
Right.
was born out of that. So we had seed funding from, my original, two of my co-founders in our original parent company. Uh, and so
Hmm.
we're in the midst of a fundraise. So I'll let you know once we're on the other side. Maybe I can come back to your podcast and talk about that experience. But I think, you know, uh, yes, it is certainly different if you're a female founder. But I would like to kind of maybe point out to if there's any investors that are listening. Just looking at myself and a few other female co-founders that I communicate with who are also in the fundraise process, who are, they have medical degrees or they have PhDs or they have, GEDs, law degrees,
Hmm.
and they've gone through all the school and they have kids. And, a lot of them have built successful relationships with their partner. If you've gotten to that point, it's like VCs really, there's no thinking, just give them money because they have worked a million times harder and faced so many
Right.
more
Right.
challenges than their male counterparts that by the time they're
I
they're
agree with
asking
that.
for money, just give them money. They're going to be successful. You can almost, because
I,
they've
I
gone
agree with the first part that they have come through a very hard time and they have done a lot more. For the second one, that's debatable whether to give them money or not. That is
I
debatable,
say it
but
in
but I
jest, right?
agree with the first part.
But I mean, it's almost like they pre-qualified themselves in the fact
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
can
yeah.
face
I agree
adversity.
with that.
They have a
Hmm.
lot more follow through, and they probably will not flake
Hmm.
out. If
Yeah.
they've gotten to the point where they've gotten a graduate degree in these very hard
Hmm.
industries, it does say something. And so that's one
Right.
thing. And then the other thing I think is build yourself a support system. So I've got amazing mentors who have been so
Hmm.
encouraging and supportive. Have I run into like blatant sexism in the VC space? A few times, and I just been doing this for the active fundraise for a few months, and I could certainly focus on that and talk about how, like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to raise funding just because I'm a woman. Like, this is ridiculous. Or I could focus on all the wonderful support that I've gotten and so many people who cheer for me and give me advice and support and connections. Um, and also, I think what helps if you are someone who doesn't quite fit in, which is, for
Hmm.
me,
Hmm.
being in deep tech space, having to raise VC funding, um, being in a very male dominated engineering space,
Hmm.
uh, I don't quite fit. And then when I look there are some funds nowadays that are focused on female founders,
Yes.
female
Yes.
VCs. And I've spoken to a lot of them, and I really don't fit in there because most of the startups are very like female oriented, makeup, clothing, childcare, child rearing type of focused startups. And
Right.
me coming in
Right.
with my defense deep tech engineering simulation software, it's like, okay, you really don't fit in. So it's like you don't fit in anywhere. And you could focus
Right.
on that, or you could think about, what helps me is that there are men that run into, uh, you know, adversities as well, and they are different, but they still run into them and they still overcome them, and they have hardships as well. They're different, but they're also hardships. And so I think maybe just noticing those stories and seeing that you're not as different as you maybe think, um, right off the bat helps.
So, if we talk about that, what are the pros and cons of being a female leader? How would you answer that?
Oh, good question. So I think cons are obvious, right? You're unique. People are not used to you being in this space. They react to you sometimes differently. So I don't even want to, let's not even
Hmm.
focus on the cons. It's been talked about so much. But there are pros, and I would say pros because I am more socially wired. Um, it is
Hmm.
easier for me, I've noticed throughout. So I've been in this tech space as an executive for the past 15 years, something like that. And so what I've noticed is I can read people a lot faster than my male counterparts a
Right.
lot of times. And so that's
Right.
been a huge benefit. Also, building out
Hmm.
networks, asking for help. asking for guidance for me seems to be a lot easier than male counterparts. And
Hmm.
so many people are willing to help if you just ask. But I find it very easy to ask for help, to ask for guidance, to be open and to admit that I don't know everything by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm fine with it. That's been definitely pros. Um,
I think this is an important lesson for the female founders that asking for help is very important. If you're not going to ask it, you're not going to get it. So at least you should dare, because if you are in an executive position, if you have started something, if you have started a business, right, or anything, and you're stuck somewhere, so you should dare to ask for help. If you're going to ask it, the maximum the other person can do is say no. That's it. You were already stuck at some point. So that has done nothing to you. But if they say yes, that means you're out of it.
exactly. And I think, one of the things we as humans, for the most part, if you're not a sociopath or a psychopath, you're just a
Hmm.
human being, you like to help. We feel bonded
Yeah,
with the other person.
of
It's a stronger
course.
connection that you build if you're helping
Hmm.
someone. So it's funny.
Hmm.
So I'm part of an accelerator called Creative Destruction Lab. I'm going to give a plug for them. They're international accelerator. We're part of their manufacturing stream. So they have like a cohort, and they have different streams. They have AI, healthcare. They're all over the globe. They're an amazing accelerator. They don't take equity and they don't ask for any money, but they give you a lot of support and amazing advisors. So we're part of this accelerator. I'm the only female CEO in the manufacturing cohort of there's 20 ventures. I'm the only female founder and or co-founder, and but the guys are great, and so we've built good friendships with some of the CEOs, and we share our trials and tribulations throughout this process. And one of the questions one of the CEOs asked, he already raised money, and he was saying, like the mentors are complaining that I am not taking this accelerator seriously and that I'm detached. And he's like, I don't have time, I'm trying to run a company, but I don't want to get kicked out. What do I do? And so I told them, like, listen, let me give you my techniques, because I've got wonderful relationships with my mentors. And I call it the lost puppy or homeless puppy technique, right? So imagine you're at I don't know if you're an animal person, but if you like animals, imagine you go
Yeah,
to
I
a
do. I
shelter.
do.
You do? Okay. So let's say you're in an animal shelter, right? And there's lots of puppies. And so you're walking
Yeah.
around, and whoever's working there says, hey, you could play with all these puppies, and so you can choose the one to take home. And you start playing with the puppies, and there's a puppy that seems cute, but it is growling at you. It wants nothing to do with you. It's looking the other way. And then there is a puppy that's looking at you, and you throw it the ball. It brings the ball to you and looks at you with big eyes. And when you pet it, it just wags its tail, and
That
it's
one
so
is
excited.
selected.
Exactly, right? Because it's responding to you, and it's responding to your
Yeah.
coaching, and it's willing and open. It's open to you, right? And so
Hmm.
I recommend, the lost poppy technique when you're just starting out in
Hmm.
the startup space, especially if you're looking to raise funding, especially if you need
Yeah.
mentors. You know,
Right.
People want to mentor people who respond to them, who take their advice, who
Right.
appreciate them, because otherwise, why mentor? So, if that helps anybody,
I
lost
think
puppy technique.
I think I should also register either as an advisor or as a mentee
I'll send you the
to that.
information.
Ex-
It's
Yeah, yeah,
excellent
for
program.
sure. Yeah, I'll happy to connect with these people.
They're great.
Okay, let's move toward the other thing, right? And that is related to uh, the very important marketing technique or your philosophy, that is human touch, right? Human centered marketing. So, how would you explain that?
So, and that comes from my, again, strengths and my value system, which is I am very extroverted. Connection with humans is very important. And yet I market in a
Hmm.
very deep tech space. For the last 15 years, I've been
Right,
marketing and
right.
doing business development in engineering software designed for PhD level engineers. That's like as deep tech as you can get. And so my challenge has been, how do you make that space, which historically has been very non-human, as I said, non-emotional, you know, we don't want to consider the human being in this as we're designing this engineering software. Very logical, straightforward, has nothing to do with humans. I mean, not really, but we will pretend it has nothing to do with humans. How do you market in that space? Because at the end, whatever you say, humans buy from other humans, including engineering software. And as much as PhD engineering experts wants to think of themselves as detached from feeling and buying solely on logic, they're not. They're still human. They're still buying on emotion,
Yeah,
right? And
I
so,
agree.
kind of early in my career, I hit upon this. My discovery was that I love customers and I love going in and seeing, and
Mm,
our customers, my customers have always been the same. It's aerospace, automotive, defense, communications, very heavy R&D type of industries. And that's who I sold and marketed to. And
mm,
I understood them because I am an engineer myself. I come from that space. So I think that's important. But also, I was really interested in how the customers solve their problems. And so I was thinking about, like, man, customers are companies like SpaceX and Tesla and Apple and Microsoft and Qualcomm and all of these amazing companies and all these startups that have engineering departments that are designing things, and they have
right,
cool
right.
stories and cool technologies. So what if we focus, instead of focusing on our software that we're trying to market, we focus on them and their stories? And so that's been
Mm,
my sort of marketing philosophy forever, and it works amazingly well if done well. If done wrong and done with someone who is not coming from an engineering background and doesn't understand engineers and just trying to sensationalize their stories, it's going to come off very in bad taste and poor, and engineers are not going to buy it, and it's just going to feel very detached. So you have to be
right,
very
right,
careful
right.
to honor the engineering background and that you understand how
Mm,
deep their technology is, but yet still bring in the feeling and the story and the color and the excitement and the feeling
mm.
into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense because I also believe that if you are showing the person behind the brand, that adds a lot more trust factor for that particular brand. So
Absolutely.
that was the reason I started coming for the in the front, and I started making this video content and all the stuff. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you look at, we are working from last 10 years in the tech space, and we are providing these services. We have worked for more than, you can say, 300 or 400 clients, right? So we have that much large clientele. But if you look at us around an year ago or a year and a half ago, you won't find us anywhere because we were working in isolation, we were doing work, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized that, okay, what are the problems we are facing? And
Mm-hmm.
the problems were that uh, we were nowhere. Nobody knew us outside our circle. So from that, I said, okay, we should handle it and we should start coming on the front foot. And we started playing because of that.
Smart. Very smart of you.
Yeah, because eventually every company needs customers, every company needs new customers, every company always needs customers, and customers always are always looking at what your background is, what you have done, and they need to trust you. So we are also building trust.
That's great. And how are you finding this experience now that you're
Oh,
out
it
here?
is. So look at it. I'm connecting to people like you, right? Isn't it great? I'm connecting. I'm connecting to a lot, very diverse people, and I'm sharing my experiences. They are sharing their experiences. Our synergies are matching. Our energies are exchanging, and this has been a very positive experience
That's
because
great.
eventually our goal is that we have to bring something positive out of it. We have nothing financial involved in this relationship. So you are going to remember me because of this, I'm going to remember you because of this, because there was no financial transaction involved in it.
Yeah,
So
much better than
that is
cold,
what my strategy.
Much better than cold blasting people through LinkedIn spam messages, right?
Much better. and and to be very frank, we all have done that, right? And people now do not respond to that as well, because they know that it is spam. So people listening to all those techniques, please don't do that. That is dead.
So actually, can I tell you? So I've had for a long time, I had a pet peeve against spam to the point where I have a personal philosophy that I absolutely will not
Hmm.
hire anyone who sends me a cold spam email. Now, your email
Okay.
was a cold note to me on LinkedIn, but it was very customized to me, and it wasn't asking me. It was very transparent of what you were looking for and why. So I responded, and it was great. But you get so many spam messages that are not
Yeah.
customizable to you, right? And so I will not ever, even if I like the spam email, I still will not buy someone who cold outreach to me. And that's just my own, being in marketing and knowing how many other ways of marketing there are, that I will not reply to clearly spam message.
Hmm.
And I think right now people are so excited with AI of how AI can just write those things for you. And you can always tell when they're written by AI. It's
Yeah.
awful. But yet people continue to do it, which is funny.
People don't even try to customize that through AI as well. They just pick up the first message and done.
Right,
Boom.
right.
So I tell them, at least customize, at least ask ChatGPT to customize it for you. That's it.
That's right.
Okay, let's move forward. Uh, what do you think about remote work, and if whether your company is remote or not?
Yeah, so my company is completely remote. We've got our developers
Okay.
based in Huntsville, Alabama. I've got our marketing folks in Utah, engineers in San Diego. I'm based in Orange County, California. Investors are all
Right.
over. So, I
Right.
mean, I think remote,
That is pretty much. That is. I call this too much remote.
too much remote. um, I don't know, again, because we're a software company, we don't have hardware that has to pass hands.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and a lot of our workforce is salespeople, and then myself,
Hmm.
who doesn't mind traveling and going to see the developers. So I think face to face is absolutely important. I think you absolutely have to put in the
Yeah.
time to put those
Hmm. Hmm.
events in place where you meet as a team, for sure. But
Right. Right.
I've worked remotely my whole career for the most part, and in some
Hmm.
part. And again, being on the road so much, being an executive in marketing and sales side of things, I'm traveling a lot. I'm working remotely a lot. So for me, it's a very smooth transition. I think I'm
Right.
also an executive that's very focused on, like I mentioned, on results. I'm very results oriented. So it's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
um, easy for me to define, here is our problem, here is the goal, here is what we're moving towards, and how you accomplish this goal. I really don't care, as long as the IRS and the Department of Justice doesn't come calling on calling me because of what you're doing, as long as it's legal and
Yeah.
ethical. I don't care if you're doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning, with a glass of wine on the beach, or 6 a.m. before you take your kids to school. I don't care, because I am very specific
Yeah.
about, here's our goal and how we get there. I think for leaders who are not as goal oriented,
Right.
who operate more of like conversations at a water cooler and more of like a human connection, it's harder, right?
Yeah.
For me, it works because of my style of leadership, and focusing on the goals
Hmm.
first. But I think absolutely, like, you can't replace face to face yet.
Right. 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 So you are the right person to ask specifically pros and cons of remote.
Pros and
You have to
cons of
number one,
remote.
two, three. One, two, three.
One, two, three. I have to do one, two, three. Okay. Well, pros is that you have a lot more opportunity to hire people that you need to hire. You're not restricted by
Yeah.
geographical location.
So
Number one,
access to talent, right?
access to talent. Number two is access to people who want more flexibility. So, I have
Hmm.
a lot of
Hmm.
people that I work with who are, let's say, moms, for example, and they have a family, and they're restricted on the times that they can work. So when they're not having to physically go somewhere, they just have a lot more flexibility. So you have, again, a lot more opportunity to hire the kind of talent that you'd like. Uh, And I work that way. So for me, I hate regular hours. I hate routine. And so for me, that works really well, the flexibility. And I think the cons are back to human connection. So there are plenty of studies that, did you know that I think it's like something from 60 to 80% of communication is nonverbal, meaning it comes from facial yeah, facial expressions, your body language, your I mean, other sensors, right? Like things like smell, for example, like touch. Um, Not that you're touching people at work, hopefully, but when you're close to a human being, you're you're reading different things that you cannot read through the screen. And engineers, especially, I had to actually have this conversation with my co-founders who are brilliant PhD electrical engineers who for a while hated turning on their camera. And I had to tell them, like, look, I am extroverted. I am constantly reading signals that maybe you are not used to doing. I cannot communicate just verbally. Like, I need to see you for a reason. And so you're losing a lot of communication when you're just doing this, when you're just doing Zoom. Even if your camera is on, you're still not seeing my full body language. There or other senses are not engaged. You can't see what kind of coffee I like, when we go to the coffee machine or whatnot. So you are definitely losing a lot of information. And so the connection is
Hmm.
harder. So I think that's the biggest
Right, right,
con.
right. That is pretty much comprehensive. Let's move toward the end of our episode. And in the end, I would like to ask you to give some advice to the female entrepreneurs, especially.
I
Normally,
think
I ask people to give advice to all the
everybody.
entrepreneurs, but for you, I am asking to give advice to the female entrepreneurs.
Mm. Uh, well, first of all, we really, really need more. Just as my main message, we need more female engineers and female
Hmm.
entrepreneurs in deep tech space,
Right, right, right.
specifically deep tech, because I think the world's really opening up to entrepreneurs in other areas and traditionally female industries. But we need women in deep tech, so that's number one. Number two, Number two for female entrepreneurs is build your network of advisors and people willing to help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And the more you ask for help, the stronger connections that you build. Um, it's hard. I don't know what else because I feel like if a female decides to go into the space, they will make it. Maybe, maybe be aware that there is a discrepancy between, you know, men and women co-founders in the space, and just be a little bit more generous towards other female uh, executives trying to get into the space, or other female
Hmm. Hmm.
co-founders.
Hmm. Right.
I find that women do tend to kind of have this mentality of like, well, I suffered to get here, so you're going to suffer as well. Because if you don't suffer, you're not gonna, you're not be good enough. And to some
Right.
extent, I buy into that too. And that's my cultural
Hmm.
bias as well, coming in from Soviet Union. That's kind of like trial by fire. You either survive or you die. That's culture. But on the other hand,
Right.
just be a little bit more kind to other females coming into
Hmm.
the space. Give them a little bit more of your time. Be a little bit more maybe generous, because right now it is still harder. Um,
Got
so
it.
I'd say
Got
that.
it. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Masha, for joining us, and thank you so much for the for this much candid conversation. I really loved it.
Oh, I think it was a blast. Thank you so much for having me here, and all the very best of luck with your marketing journey and with this
Thank
podcast.
you so much, and for the audience, thank you so much for watching the episode. And we promise to keep more tech stars to your screen. Keep watching.